big old thing with flipping its tail.
Good morning. I will now call to order the July 12, 2023 Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Land Use Hearing. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone. We are holding this meeting in person and virtually. If you've joined us via Zoom for this meeting and are interested in providing public comment, we will prompt you regarding how to do that when the time is right. The Zoom link and instruction to participate via Zoom are located at www.clackamas.us/meetings/BCC/land-use. Today we will consider ZDO-283, a proposed legislative text amendment to the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Development Ordinance that is intended to make changes to the comprehensive plan and ZDO that are necessary to comply with state mandates, clarify language, correct errors, and adopt provisions that require only minimal analysis. General public comment will be taken at the usual allotted time. As always, the public is welcome to sign up to testify. For those attending in person, please fill out a blue card over here and give it to Tony, and you will be called on to provide the testimony at the appropriate time. When you are called on, please be sure to include your name and your area of residence. I would like to remind all participants, including staff, all elected officials, and members of the public, that Robert's Rules of Order will be enforced in this hearing. We welcome your opinions and look forward to your polite participation. The hearing on ZDO-283 will proceed as follows. 1. We will first hear a presentation from Principal Planner Martha Fritzie, who is sitting at the side dais. Then Planning Commission Chair will present the Planning Commission's recommendation. Next, I will open the hearing for public testimony, beginning with the public officials who will have 5 minutes each. Then representatives from the recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes each. Finally, others wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting us today is our clerk, Tony Mayernick, right here. Planner Martha Fritzie, as I said, and then County Counsel Stephen Magcor. We will now go ahead with staff presentation from Martha Fritzie. Thank you, Martha, and welcome.
Thank you. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we need to get running momentarily. So while he's getting that up, I guess I will mention there's a few sheets of paper that I put in front of you this morning. We have had several pieces of written testimony over the course of this project. The first 6, exhibits 1 through 6, were in your original packet that was sent last week. Yesterday, you were emailed another 6 that had come since that packet, and then these 3 that are listed and included down here are things that I received this morning. So you should have all the written testimony. It is in 3 pieces, though. I apologize for that. It just has to do with the timing of when it shows up. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Martha Fritzie with the county's Planning and Zoning Division. As was mentioned, we're here to talk about ZDO 283, which is a package of legislative amendments to the comprehensive plan and the county's zoning and development ordinance. This package is put before you today. It includes a number of items to comply with mandates, to line our codes up a little bit better with state law in some cases, to clarify existing language, correct errors minor errors, citation errors type things that we have found in our code, and to adopt some optional provisions that require a minimal amount of analysis. And so this package came forth through our long-range planning work program. We we intended to annually do what is called the minor and time-sensitive code amendments package to do all of those things that I noted previously. This package is about a year late. We put it on hold for a little while just due to some staffing issues. We had talked to you in a policy session about it about a year ago in July of 2022. And then, if you recall, Jennifer Hughes, the planning director, came and talked to you back in May at Issues just to make sure you wanted to proceed with this. We did proceed. We talked to the Planning Commission at a study session in June a year ago, and then went back to them for a public hearing in June of this year, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. It should be noted also that some of the items in this package came about from community input, and I think that the written testimony and what you'll hear today really illustrates or gets a little more in depth with those items that came forth that we were responding to the public requests. So what's in this proposal? It was a huge package, a packet of information, I realize that. There are a lot of changes proposed. We are proposing to touch 32 sections of our zoning and development ordinance. I can say that a lot of those really are just clerical and sort of housekeeping amendments, but there are some more substantive issues. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these 5 substantive issues today, but I'm happy to answer other questions about anything else that you may have seen in the packet that you have questions about. I'm just not going to go through every single section of code amendments. So really, generally, this packet's doing 9 main things. The first 5 being the most substantive issues, including allowing standalone restrooms in a particular zoning district, changing some standards for our forest template test dwellings, doing our best to align non-conforming use discontinuation and implementation periods, modifying our definition of lot of record, and streamlining and clarifying some processes involved within some of our protected resource areas, our habitat conservation areas, and water quality resource areas. Other things of note that this packet is doing is specifically exempting detached single-family dwellings, manufactured dwellings, and their accessory uses from having to go through design review in commercial and industrial zones, something that we've needed to do for a long time. It's not necessary, and it's not something that we actually do, but our code there was a bit of a disconnect. We're proposing to expressly allow electronic signatures. Again, in this sort of day and age, we feel that that's appropriate and something we'd like to do. We are changing the amount of paper that we send out with decisions, are proposing to change the amount of paper we send out with a notice of decision, and then making a number of other minor and non-substantive changes, largely clarifications in terms and definitions, and also correcting those clerical errors that we have found. So I said I was going to talk in a little more detail about the 5 substantive issues. I will try to go through these as quickly as possible. Sometimes it is a little complicated, and I do talk fast, so I'm happy to answer anything at the end of this if you have questions. So the first of the substantive issues is this idea of public restrooms. And so in the rural tourist commercial districts, which are largely found up on the mountain. There's a couple of maps in here along, what happened? Uh-oh, was that me? Sorry. Along Highway 26, up in Welch's, Wemmy Welch's area, up in Government Camp area, and along the Government Camp loop. There has been an interest in allowing, why is it, oh, it's the pink areas identified on these maps here that you can see in front of you. There has been an interest in allowing standalone public restrooms. Currently, if you wanted to build a public restroom, it would have to be associated with something else on the property. And having a standalone public restroom up there would help support businesses, would help support tourism. And so the proposal would be to allow it in these pink areas, but through a conditional use permit. So it would go through a land use hearing. There would be consideration of impacts to neighbors. There would be opportunity for public input. And so that's the first more substantive change. We've not received any testimony that I'm aware of related to this particular topic. And so we're going to move on to the forest template test standard, which I'm sure you're aware if you've read your packet, that there has been a lot of testimony, both for and against, and there's reasons for both. And so what the forest template test standards are, so if you have a property in a forest designated land, it would be zoned timber or ag forest. Rural areas tend to be forested properties. Homes are not an outright allowed use under state law. State law does allow for homes to be built under certain circumstances. And one of the circumstances is if you can pass all of the requirements under a forest template test. And essentially what that does is if you own this red piece of property here, and it doesn't have a house on it, you can, on top of it, put 160 acre square. You have to center it. You can rotate it, but you have to center it. And then you count the number of lots and dwellings that exist within this template. And so if there are a certain number of lots and dwellings within this template area, there's a certain amount of development already, then you too are allowed to build. Currently, our requirements differ from state law in two ways. We require you find more houses within that template area than state law allows, and that's not quite the right term. State law would require you only find 3 houses within that template area. Our zoning code requires 4 or 5, depending on what your soil types are. That's not inconsistent with state law. We are allowed to be more restrictive, but we also can line it up with state law and require fewer if we choose to, which is the proposal in this packet. The other way that our code differs from state law is if you have within your template area an 80-acre lot, like identified in the yellow, you can't count that one. You can't count that as one of the lots or houses that you find within your template area, whereas state law would allow you to count it. And so the particular proposal here is to basically line our code up with those requirements under state law. Require you only have to find the 3 dwellings in that template area and allow you to count dwellings and lots that are larger than 80 acres. There's a couple of reasons certainly for and against this. As we have gone through this process, it seems that this is certainly the topic that has generated the most conversation. I can say that these existing criteria have existed since the mid-90s. Our code has been more restrictive since state law since the mid-90s. We have looked back and not been able to figure out why that happened. That was just a choice that was made back then. The result of making this change certainly would allow more forest land properties to qualify for a dwelling. I mean, because of the very individual nature of this analysis, it is really not possible to know how many. I think that it's fair to say there won't be it will not allow new lots to be divided. There won't be a sudden proliferation of houses in the forested area, but it most certainly will allow more. We just don't know how many. I think making this change is consistent with the county's practice in recent years of aligning our code with state law, but we have heard a lot of concerns both from the Planning Commission and from members of the public about approving more dwellings in forest land areas, particularly in light of fires. We're all very aware of impacts of wildfires in recent past. And so this is a topic that you'll probably hear a lot more about today. The third substantive item has to do with non-conforming uses. So non-conforming uses are uses that were established legally at the time they were established, but through the course of time and different zoning changes, they have essentially been zoned out. Like they would not be allowed currently, but because they were established at the time, they are allowed to continue to operate. And so this nice little, I like this little it's the up house, the old single family house that ended up in a commercial zone that wouldn't currently allow it, but it's allowed to continue because it was established legally at the time. And so the specific proposal would be to extend the discontinuance period, or the period in which you're allowed. So if you have a non-conforming use, you have to continue to operate it in order to keep it. If you discontinue that use for more than 1 year, under our current code, you do not get to reestablish it. There's a couple of reasons why we would change that. One is, I think, in some cases, 1 year is not long enough, particularly in light of recent events and a lot of, businesses that had to shut down, it wasn't their choice. They were forced to shut down for periods of time. And so there are a number of reasons why 1 year may not be long enough. We also have this process where if you have a nonconforming use, you can apply and alter it and change it, change the use, add on, expand the use. And if you are approved for that, you have a 4-year approval. And so for a long time, there's been this disconnect between their discontinuance period and the alteration period, and what happens if it's discontinued during that period? We actually get asked that question. So the first part of the proposal with nonconforming uses is to really just line those two periods up, make them 2 years. You get a 2-year discontinuance period, shorten the approval period if you have an alteration, with the understanding that if you can't finish it in that 2 years, you still can apply for a time extension. And then based on some testimony that we received, both written and at the Planning Commission, we made some additional changes to that between the Planning Commission and this hearing, and it's reflected in your board packet, that adds a little more time for particular uses that have been approved for an alteration and actually have gotten their building permits and are working toward that alteration. You do get a little bit more time. That's a lot, and it's a little confusing. Again, happy to answer questions. And talking about confusing, the fourth substantive change is amending our lot of record definition. And so what is a lot of record? A lot of record is what we in planning look at is a lot for development purposes. So there's a number of different ways that you can identify a unit of land. It could be a tax lot, which is what the tax assessor uses for tax assessment, a discrete parcel for ownership or sale purposes, or this idea of a lot of record for development purposes. These things are not always synonymous. They're not always the same. It can be the case on a lot of record that you have several different tax lots or tax accounts. There's a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is because under our lot of record definition, if two lots were under the same ownership at the time of first zoning, they were consolidated into one lot of record if one or both of those lots didn't meet sort of the underlying minimum lot size or other standards. This is a provision that has been in our lot of record definition for many decades. It is a provision that we are not aware that many, if any, other counties in the state have, and it's also not required under state law. And in some ways, it's not even really fair because of the way that we look at ownership. If, for example, I owned a lot at first zoning that didn't meet the standard, and I owned a lot with my husband, an adjacent lot that didn't meet the standard, those two would not have been combined. But if I owned both of those lots just in my name, they would have. And so there is a fairness question. I can also say that as staff has to do a lot of research to determine what are lots of record, this provision in particular creates a lot of extra time and research and costs more money. And so we really think that it's time to streamline our definition of lot of record to get rid of this lot consolidation. The amendments would also remove a provision that allows certain foreclosed lots to become lots of record. We think that that's inconsistent with state law, and then we made some other clarifying amendments to that definition. Oh, look, I already went through that one. And so then I'm going to move on to the last substantive issue, and it has to do with streamlining and clarifying processes within our habitat conservation areas and water quality resource areas. We have a lot of regulations around these mapped resource areas inside our urban area and inside the metro boundary, and these are generally around stream corridors, generally. And currently, we have some processes that you're required to go through that require a land use application and a fee that we think, because they're clear and objective, they can easily be taken care of through a building permit or another development permit, and it's more efficient and cost-effective for the applicant. There's also some other streamlining processes that we have gone through with our HUCA and Habitat Conservation Area and water quality resource standards. They are very complicated standards. The attempt really is to help streamline the process and make it better, both for the public and for staff who has to explain it to the public. And so finally, if as part of your packet, you have the Planning Commission staff report. It contains actually a lot more detail than that about the proposal. It contains detailed findings against all of the applicable approval criteria that we have to look at when we make these kinds of changes, including the statewide planning goals, statutes, administrative rules, Metro's functional plan, the county's comprehensive plan, and the ZDO. I'm not going to go into those findings, but they are detailed, like I said, in the Planning Commission staff report. And then finally, we did have a Planning Commission hearing on June 26th. At that hearing, we had 4 parties testifying. All the testimony at that point was in favor of certain portions of this packet. We did have one party that requested some additional changes to the non-conforming use language, which we have made and is reflected in the packet that you have before you today. The most significant issues that came up really related to the template test, the lot of record, the non-conforming use, and the habitat conservation area amendments. And again, you may hear some about that, some of that today in your testimony. Ultimately, the Planning Commission recommended to approve the amendments in ZDO 283 with 3 changes. One of them is pulling out the For It template test standard amendments. And so the Planning Commission did not recommend approval of the changes to the template test standards. They recommended approval of everything else. And there were several reasons for it. I believe the Planning Commission chair is supposed to be testifying today, but it may be via Zoom, I'm not sure. We're hoping so. And he can provide some more color on why that decision was made. The other 2 changes really are more technical. It had to do with making some additional amendments to the lot of record definition that staff wanted to do for clarity, and then the non-conforming use changes. And so the staff's recommendation is actually adoption of the text amendments in ZDO 283 with the inclusion of the forest template test standard changes. We wanted to keep that in your packet because this is something that you had all talked about in the past and wanted to give you an option to weigh in on it, understanding that that is not what the Planning Commission recommended. And that is the end of my presentation today.
Thank you. We, according to your script, commissioners, will be a lot of time for commissioners to make comments. However, we're going to ask Gerald Murphy, Planning Commission Chair, to present the Planning Commission's recommendation. Is he in the room, Tony, or online?
Madam Chair, I have Gerald Murphy online. Mr. Murphy, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Chair Smith and Commissioners, good morning. Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak. This is a pretty controversial issue over the forest template dwellings. All the other amendments we discussed, deliberated over, and we're quite happy with what planning had come to as decisions made to change the language on some of this with the help of some of our public testimony, which was awesome to have the people show up. The forest template dwelling test, we go back to June 27th, 2022 during the workshop. We had, I think, 17 amendments that we looked at that time. We supported all those changes that could possibly happen as a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, except the change to the forest timber test dwelling. This particular issue is a issue that right now would open up more development within the forest, and it wasn't taken very well by the Planning Commission, especially some of the forest owners themselves and myself that takes part in a Mount Hood Corridor wildfire preparedness reduction partnership, which I have a meeting right after this up at the Hoodland Fire Station. But this particular issue, as we look at the forest template dwelling test, we had Planning Commissioner Tammy Smith spoke, loves the changes, except one, loves being more restrictive than the state on the forest template dwelling test. Isn't just a house, it's a driveway, it's a house, a septic system, a drain field, it's a barn or two, it's fencing and livestock and other buildings. And it'll never grow trees again. So if you say you value Clackamas County's resource land, then we need to walk the walk. And that was something that I think really resonates through many of the planning commissioners. 3 planning commissioners voted to support the changes. But I myself take this quite serious, that we're just putting more people in the woods. And during the summertime, this is becoming a very scary place. The other amendments that were minor amendments, we reviewed and we really had no discussion. We agreed upon making those changes. But the forest template dwelling test, we could not pass. So I'm open for questions.
Gerald Murphy, have you finished?
Yes, I have.
Okay, thank you very much. We now open it to commissioners' comments. I'm sure we'll have several. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Gerald, for the for your testimony and update. So that the vote was what you said, 3 that voted against the template or for the template. So that was 4-3, or what was the vote count, the final vote count?
It was 4 yes to remove it from this package and 3 in favor of passing it.
Okay. Could you maybe elaborate on the thoughts of those who vote, of the 3 who voted for it?
There really wasn't much discussion from them at all on it, that they just supported change.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, I'm not sure if this question is for Ms. Fritzie or for Chair Murph. But for other counties in the state of Oregon who have heavily forested areas like Clackamas County, whose policies are in agreement with the state standard, do any of those counties report significant problems because of their agreement with the forest template test standard?
I am going to say I have no idea. I think that you're all aware of Glenn Hamburg, who was the planner who used to bring these packages through. He did a lot of the original research. And I don't know how many other counties are aligned with the state standard or are more restrictive. I believe that most of the other counties in the state just implement what the state standard is. I don't know that they'd even really have any context for understanding if there was some sort of impact, if they've always just had that standard.
And my other question is this. When you mentioned that you did not know how many new homes might be created if we were to comply with the state standard for the forest template test, but how much land in Oregon, or in Clackamas County, would actually be affected by this? Are we talking about small areas? Or are we talking about potentially a large area in Clackamas County that could be fundamentally changed by this small change to the forest template test? Because some of the opposition here, people are concerned about population increases in areas where roads are limited in capacity. They're concerned about the fire. So, Ms. Fritzie, what I'm trying to understand here this morning is this. If we comply with the state standard, and I personally look at this as a property rights issue, I don't like to make I don't like to restrict the rights of our property owners any more than is absolutely necessary. So for me to make a decision on item number 2, forest template standard, I would like to get an idea about what the impact will be on the county if we approve the change.
You're throwing all the hard questions at me right up front. So it's hard to say. There is a fair amount of our rural county that is zoned forest or mixed farm and forest. I think the biggest impact would be in areas where there's already parcelization. And for example, a lot of the properties up, in the very rural areas up on the mountain are very large lot properties. Those would still not qualify for a template test. Mm-hmm. It's really in areas where there has historically been smaller lots developed in the past. And so it's really, really hard to tell. It's very individualized, but you have to look at each lot and the area around each individual lot.
And I have one more question on this, and that has to do with mitigating the exposure to fire for any new properties that might be built if we were to change this template. In 2020, we lost a lot of homes in the southern part of the county. Is there any requirement to build a more fire-resistant structure should this be passed? In other words, for the people who are concerned about this piece, number 2 here on the template test, could their concerns be mitigated by more fire-resistant construction techniques?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I do not know if their concerns would be mitigated, but absolutely. Any new homes that are approved through a land use approval like this in the forested areas are required to have defensible space around the house. We have certain fire break standards around the house. They're required to have certain like fire retardant roof materials and other such building materials that I, as a planner, don't know all about, but there are certainly rules to help reduce risk.
Okay, thank you. And I have one final question that has to do with number 5, the habitat conservation area. Currently, the Oregon Department of Forestry is looking at making changes to the habitat conservation plan that will affect the standoff for logging and other activities around riparian areas. This number 5, if we approve this, will that make greater restriction on a property owner's ability to utilize their property?
No, it won't. It does not create any greater restrictions. It hopefully will create an easier process. The actual standards aren't changing or becoming more restrictive. And so you're talking about the habitat conservation area and the water quality?
Yes.
Yeah. We're largely proposing process changes to make it easier to navigate our process.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner West, you're up.
I think this important conversation kind of speaks to a persistent and greater problem about the state of Oregon's inability to be good stewards of our forest lands in general, and the continued abdicated role of actually having well-maintained forest lands that are safer and can actually be better utilized for all Oregonians and for future generations to come. Part of my question is around density. I'm from the urban area. I grew up in the urban area. I live in the suburbs. Sometimes I think Clackamas County is great because it's where the the rural and the urban kind of, they collide, right? And they kind of blend and kind of, we're on the edge of it. So my question is a little bit, when I look at your map and I see the standard of, 5 houses on 160 acre square, if you have 5 houses, that's 32 acre plots. They're huge. I don't see this being multi-family, hyper-dense areas, big lots with a house on it. And considering how poor our state has been at actually like mitigating wildfires and managing forests, I really believe that people are going to take better care of their personal property than the state of Oregon has done. I think there's there's a clear indictment. It's against the state government on forest lands and the inability to also like provide valuable infrastructure that's necessary. I mean, they just abdicated that role, and we just watch our forests go up in blaze season after season. It looks like Armageddon in 2020. A lot of that can be traced back objectively to bad state policy. However, some of the arguments to me seem to be around infrastructure concerns, and if a person happens to be in the forest, it's going to catch on fire. Or if they live anywhere in the forest lands, it's going to catch on fire. Well, I don't think it's necessarily the people that live in the rural part of the county burning down our state. I think it might be more accountability needs to be held to the actual state actors and bureaucracies. It's not rural people that are burning down our state. It's a little bit offensive to just say like, we want to care about housing and people in my generation want to have affordable land to build on, but God forbid we made property rights more open to them so they can actually have a place of their own. So one side of our mouth we say we want to help affordability and housing and open up access with land use, and on the other end it's like, no, you're going to burn down the forest. I know I'm just having a hard time with that message. So my question is there could be a concern if it becomes overly dense, right? So what is the density going to look like in reality as a real concern? Like there are, some of these things matter, like infrastructure and density in certain areas and appropriateness. That's why we have zoning laws. So can you help me understand what's the reality of the density going to actually look like if we make this change?
So I'll do my best. First of all, you are correct. I also am a suburbanite, and we are not talking about even suburban densities. Nothing about these changes would allow people to create new lots or create subdivisions, divide their lots. It really is just allowing for some more houses to be built on existing lots. The lots out in the rural area are larger. They may be an acre in some cases. They may be 80 acres in some cases. So it's definitely rural properties. Because it's so hard to tell really how many properties would be positively affected by this, I can't say what it would do to density. I think when I think of the rural area, I don't think of density at all. It's not dense in the way that we urban and suburban people think about it. There will be more homes. What I can tell you, which, not to confuse the issue, but when you are doing a template test, when you're counting the houses inside that template, those houses had to exist in 1993. So it is not the case where if you do a template test and you get approved now and build a house, your neighbor can come in and then count your house. And it's not like multiplying within that template area. It's a static look in 1993. So even if it allows one more person to have a house in that template area, it doesn't create this snowball.
Chair and board, I'm old enough to remember when people like in Molalla and Estacada saved farmland, saved their communities with their own backhoes, with their own grit, when, for whatever reason, they weren't able to get the support from emergency services that they needed, that they were left to their own devices to protect their own properties. And I don't know, I come from a background where that's not too uncommon to have to get up early in the morning, work hard, take care of your own, and do it again the next day. I just don't think that I think that there's a bit of alarmism here. And I trust people that are my family with the backhoe that can take care of their own property.
Thank you. I'd like to address this as well. I live in one of these zones. My family purchased the property in 1959, and my husband and I were fortunate enough to be able to buy it, and it's an ag forest zone. We have forestry and we have agriculture as well. I think the people who live there are able to take care of their property. And a very real example was in August of 2020, 1 month before catastrophic forest fires, across the road, a power line had arced, and it caused a spark, and it caused a fire right next to my father's house. Fortunately, my nephew had been visiting my father. He grabbed the fire extinguisher, and he ran over and he put out that fire. In the meantime, the fire department was called. If he had not been present, living at that location, that fire would have ravaged not only my entire farm, but those in the area. And that one incident took me to my knees. It scared the daylights out of me. What if nobody had been home? And you talk about defensible spaces. It's up to all of us. And my husband, being the person he is, won't allow large trees around our home. You clear out everything. And I'm going to read some testimony that was supplied by the Clarks Highland CPO, signed by 6 people who said this: "We need people to take care of the land. Because guess what, folks? Government isn't going to do it for you. One of the objects of the ag and forest timber designations is to conserve the forest land and to minimize wildfire hazards and risks. If there are absent landlords or huge tracts, the forests become overtaken by berries, Scotch broom, and invasive plants like tansy. Those of us living here, fighting an uphill battle to keep the land safe. We need people living here and working their land." And that's very true. And I want to talk about the template issue for a minute, and Martha, you touched on it. Let's say there's a 500-acre tract of forest land, and there's nothing on it, and there's no houses around it. Well, you're not going to be able to build a house on that because it doesn't pass the template test. The template test looks at houses already in the area, and like Martha said, you cannot create something that does not already exist. I live in one of those areas. Across the road from, I have 50 acres. Across the road from me are more dense areas. People have 10 acres. They have 5 acres. The man next to me who built several years ago has 20 acres. And he had to go through a template test, I assume, to get his building permit. So I'm not so worried about the wildfire. I think people in the area take care of the fires. And it was very obvious to me when Commissioner Schrader and I toured South Clackamas County, the areas of Molalla and Estacada, 2 weeks after the fires. And if it hadn't been the locals providing their own equipment and their tractors and their water tenders and just gutted it out with picks and axes and shovels to stop that, there would have been a loss of life, and we didn't have that. Yes, we lost residents and some businesses and some buildings, and that was very unfortunate. But that was a catastrophic, I believe, a 100-year event, and I do believe that the state of Oregon and even Clackamas County are better prepared to deal with that. I do appreciate those people who are concerned about forest fires and wildfires in this area. But I was at a parade this last week in Sandy, and one of the Clackamas County firefighters were there, and I said, well, how was the fireworks on Tuesday? This was Thursday. On Tuesday, did you have many? Because in my area, we didn't have a lot for the first time in a very long time. And he says, oh, we had them. I says, was there any forest fires or urban fires started from fireworks? He says, no. But we have been treating forest fires. And I says, well, where did they come from? Well, it was people coming out to camp in campsites that built a fire, didn't totally distinguish them, went to bed, or they left, and there's still a tiny bit of coal, and sure enough, the wind whips up. And so it really is people understanding how to mitigate wildfire risk, and it certainly isn't leaving a campfire that it's still hot. And those are many, many issues that we can look at. I am in favor of the template issue. I'm in favor of all this because I do think we need to be in alignment with state code. I don't think it's really correct for Clackamas County to be more restrictive, and Commissioner Schultz says it's a property rights issue. What this whole package does, and it's huge, it's 613 pages. And the attachment A, red line, starts on page 44. It's a little bit cumbersome, but it's really large. This allows for flexibility in zoning. It is streamlining the process, of which we get complaints all the time in the planning department. You guys are so cumbersome, it's taking so long. Why are you doing this? We're cleaning up the code, and I think more importantly, again, we are in alignment with state law, and I do not believe we should be more restrictive. Thank you. Commissioner Schrader.
I am torn about this issue, so I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate just to read one of the letters that show a concern. With increased risk of wildfires because of our drier, hotter summers and the more frequent unusually high wind events, the increase of population increases the risk of fires started by people and evacuation problems if we do have a fire. Our area is especially vulnerable because, and this is Bull Run area, especially vulnerable because we are in a 10 to 11 mile stretch along Bull Run and Gordon Creek roads between Teaneck Road near Roslyn Lake and Rickett Road in Corbett, with only one egress each way, a total of two. If one is blocked by fire, a fallen tree, or a rock landslide, we have only one way out. Depending on where that problem might be, more population would make a bad situation worse. I would hope that you would oppose the change to the zoning laws. Now, I can't disagree with this. I really am just talking about it so people are really, aware of the risk. It would increase some density, probably not to the extent where we're going to have like out and out all development there. But I just want to remind folks, if we change the template, which I think is a distinct possibility, remember the risks that we're facing, because as Tootie said, as the chair said, we did visit the area, what happened, where that is, and it was pretty devastating to see the impact of that. We were extremely lucky not to see a loss of life. And we're seeing more and more of these, what they're calling, and this is an insurance definition, conflagration. Is a fire large enough to spread across a wide area, often destroying more than one property and potentially causing the loss of human lives? Insurers monitor areas that are susceptible to this risk. So if we change the template, fine, but I also think that we need to do so knowing that I think we're facing a time because of climate change there, we're going to continually see more and more of these things happening. I do agree with Commissioner West that forest management can help mitigate that. And I do agree that we have not done the job of mitigating as well as we could in this state. However, I do think because of the external issues with what we've been seeing with heat domes, what we've been seeing with flooding all over, I think there's no doubt in my mind that the climate change models as predicted by climate scientists seem to be actually quite true. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of when you're building in these areas of the risk. There's going to be insurance issues, so on and so forth. And the other thing I did want to point out is one of the things that happened during the wildfires was that that I thought was very interesting. How you fight a forest fire conflagration with bringing in folks from external areas who are trained in forest fire specifically is quite different than how you mitigate and manage urban fires with our urban fire departments. One of the things that happened was this, that there was a big controversy because some of our firefighters of our fire departments were pulled back So people were seeing fire approaching their house. They were called back because the conflagration was so bad. There was a huge dome that was getting heavier and heavier with smoke and heat and so on. And one of the reasons they pulled them back, and people were upset because they said, my home's going to burn, my home's going to burn. But they weren't trained forest fire folks. They were fire departments. And the issue was that if that dome had gotten heavy enough, it would have been like an atomic bomb that dropped and everything would have blown up. And we were pretty lucky that didn't happen, but I just want to be clear that those kinds of risks are out there, and that one of the things we need to do if we're going to move ahead with changing the template, which I think is going to happen today, is make sure people are fully aware that that I don't think this is going to go away. I think, obviously, what we're seeing this summer across the country, we're seeing more heat, we're seeing more, no humidity, dry conditions, flooding, fires, and so on and so forth. So should we go ahead, I would caution people to make sure that, number one, they can get fire insurance, okay? And number two, be aware if you're in a forest zone that you have to have wildfire experts, not just your urban firefighters, who could eventually just be pulled back, and then your home could, really get burned to the ground. So there are risks here. I guess that's just what I want to point out. Do I think that it's probably... I think it's up to a personal choice if people choose to take that risk if we change that template. But please be aware of that, because we could be in a position again where we have massive forest fires, and again, we could have urban firefighters out there who once again get called back, and you could lose your property. We are extremely lucky we didn't lose life, Judy, I think, when I saw that. So those are my comments. Just understand the risks. I don't think things are going to get... I don't think they're going to get better. I think that we are better at mitigating it, but even areas that have mitigated the risk can still burn to the ground. So, anyway.
Thank you. Commissioners, we will have a lot of time to comment on this, and our county attorney has cautioned me that I need to go to public testimony. We have 2 more people in the queue I would like to get to, but you'll have another opportunity to speak as well. Commissioner Savas, go ahead.
I don't have anything else to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask 2 questions. I will opine later and comment later. So the 1993 requirement, that's a state requirement?
Yes.
Okay. And my other question for legal is, as a result of this coming to the Planning Commission and coming to the Board of County Commissioners and their hearing, does this open up opportunities for appeals on both sides, whereas absent these processes, there wouldn't have been an ability to appeal the current code?
It does open up the prospect for appeal, yes.
Okay.
If you were to adopt any of these, they're subject to appeal.
Had we not done this, that appeal opportunity would not have been there.
Had you not made any changes, you would have no appeal opportunity.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need for now.
Thank you, Commissioner West.
Commissioner Salvas, great questions. Thank you for asking those. White, quick question. Has any fire district, any fire entity within Clackamas County raised concerns regarding this zone change and the potential increased risks?
We've not received any comments from a fire district.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. We can have more time to talk about it. We're not in a hurry today. But I do want to open the public hearing for testimony on this item, beginning with public officials. Are there any public officials in the room or on Zoom who would like to testify? If so, you have 5 minutes. Okey-doke. Are there any representatives from any CPOs or agencies that wish to testify in the room or on Zoom? If so, you have 3 minutes. Do I see anybody out there? Tony? No one online. We will now hear testimony from members of the public. I will call the names of people who have indicated an offer to testify. You have filled out a blue card, and in-person testimony goes first, and there's several of them. First, Ann Delphil, come forward, state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
I want to thank you, Commissioners.
Go ahead and introduce yourself, your area of residence.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And we don't bite, just say whatever you need to say.
So my name is Ann Delfell. Presently, I live in Portland, but my property is on South Olson Road. And that's what I'm speaking of today. I want to thank you, Commissioners, for this opportunity to share my story. My name is Ann Delfell, as I said. My husband and I are here in support of all the ZDO 283 amendments for Clackamas County and the Comprehensive Plan. I took a job 3 years ago as an instructional assistant at Malino Elementary in the Molalla River School District in anticipation of moving into this community. And I love working there. I love the community that I've been helping teach. My husband and I fell in love with and bought the property at 20988 South Olson Road 6.5 years ago. It was an idyllic setting of 20 acres with many trees. 2 ponds that are fed by a spring that empties into a creek on the east part of our property. We have always been conservation-minded and wish to clear out the invasive blackberries, Scotch broom, and ragwort, to replant with plants native to the area. We also want to protect the riparian areas on our property for the wildlife that exists on our property. Another bonus was that it was right next to my husband's twin sister's property. We wanted to set a small manufactured home on the site where the previous owner had cleared already and intended to build. The property had been approved for a dwelling in 2001. And the previous owner had power brought in, a well-drilled well house with a pole barn. And that included 2 different driveways on the north side of our property, which was an old logging road, and then the driveway that leaded to the building area. Excuse me. The property was marketed as buildable with a price to match. We invested our life savings into this property with the intent to be good stewards of this precious piece of habitat. My brother-in-law Marvin, whose name is also on the deed to the property, went down to the county planning zoning department for due diligence and was told that nothing had changed since the last approval of the forest template dwelling test, which gave the previous owners the ability to build. The method the planner used to check was a piece of plexiglass representing 160 acres over a plat mat of the area. We didn't renew the application right away as we still had 2 children in school and wanted them to graduate in the district we presently live in.
Go ahead and finish.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, I'm sorry. In 2020, the Unger-Colton Complex wildfires raged through our property. The pole barn, well house, and approximately 10 acres of our trees we lost. Losing all this was very hard because not only did we lose the pole barn, but all the contents that were stored within, which included a tractor and building supplies and tools. We have restored the power and the well as on-site water is a priority. We are in the process of cleaning up the aftermath of the fire and also the ice storm damage. I'm planning to replant the trees we lost with a variety of native trees to rebuild the forest on the property and also keep the forest floor clear of wildfire fuel. We understand the value of healthy riparian areas for water quality, wildlife habitat, and climate resiliency. In 2020, after our youngest child graduated from high school, we applied for a forest template dwelling test. We met all requirements except for being 40 feet shy of the 11th property needed for the set criteria. So our application was denied. At this time, the planning department was using GIS to determine property lines, and we were told it is that much more accurate method. After we appealed the decision and again were denied, we thought that this was the end of our dream, and we were still recovering monetarily from the pandemic. We could not afford to buy another piece of property and build on it with the sale of this one zoned as it was. Melissa Lord, planner assigned to our dwelling application, informed me that a change of language was in the works to align the ZDO in Clackamas County with the state's. The one in particular included that tax lots record over 80 acres could not be included for the 11th tax lots required to qualify for the forest template dwelling approval. There are 2 such tax lots within our 160-acre template test area. The amendment item number 2 in ZDO 283, which allows acreage over 80 to be included for the criteria to qualify for a dwelling, will help us with the approval we need and to fill our dream.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Sir, do you need to say anything, or are you good to go?
Oh, no, I'm just moral support.
He used your
for it.
time, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming today. Thank you, and I'll call on the next person. Up next is Ann Hutchinson. It's all right, we have time. Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes. For anybody wanting to testify, one of my Toastmasters training taught me a valuable lesson. If you want to testify and you have written testimony, you can do about 90 words to 100 words a minute, and that's if you talk fast like me right now. So if you ever want to write anything up and you haven't done it before, do about 90 minutes.
I'll talk.
90 words per minute, and that's a good measure, but sir, go ahead.
Would you please pass this to the commissioners? My name is Annie Hutchinson, and I am a neighbor, per se, to the individuals, Ann and Jason. I live on Holt Road, which is off of Unger, and there's a couple of things that you people have brought up today that I was not going to address, but I will, if you will give me the time to do so. First off, one of the things that Ann neglected to say in her testimony is that of all of the properties that are surrounding her property, every one of those has a house on it, with the exception of the 80 acres, which I don't know whether you commissioners are familiar with. The Harmon estate, Wendell Harmon, who was a forester forever and bought property throughout the county, and he and his family and his estate own that acreage. And the picture that I'm showing to you is of the wildfire fires of 20. This was behind my home, several hundred feet, and this is what would have happened to the neighborhood had not the individuals, ourselves included, gotten out our tractors, our track hoes, our backhoes, everything to fight those fires. We made our own fire lines. Mm-hmm. At the very last minute, Clackamas County was able to come in, thank God for Chief Clark, Corliss rather. You're probably familiar with him, a lovely man. But they came in and helped save the day. But ironically, we talk about where the fires start. Is it going to be something that somebody sets in, whatever? That particular fire actually started on Unger Road. It started at the BLM because PGE had a wire that arced, and in turn, it caught the forest on fire. It ran through all of the BLM land, down to Bower, down to Sheweeb, down to Holt, and back down by us. Had we not stopped the fire at my property, it would have gone on to Mr. Bookie's, hit Beaver Creek Road, and God knows where it would have gone from there, because you wouldn't have been able to stop it. And those are all heavily forested timber company areas back where it's very dense. There are no houses. It were the people in the houses that stopped the fire. And actually, Coonsey and those people that came in that donated their water trucks that helped fight the fires, they were the ones who stopped it. So when we talk about whether or not the county, the state, whoever, stops these things, no, it was the actual individual homeowners that did that. But to address the template matter, which is why I was particularly here and interested in, I think it's unfair that you use a template, tell somebody that it's okay to build, give them permission, they buy the property that they bought, dependent upon the information that they received from the county, yet to be told later down the line, oh, no, we've got a better mousetrap, you can't use that anymore, we're going to use this different, we're going to change the rules, and we're not going to comply with every other county in the state. We're going to be completely separate. We're going to make our own little laws, unlike the rest of the counties who do adhere to what the state has to say. And one other thing that I would like to point out is during the Planning Commission meeting that I sat in on and listened to, it's ironic that Ms. Smith, who I believe that was her name, is that correct? Is she who was it that brought the question at the Planning Commission?
Commissioner Tammy Stevens?
Stevens, yes. Ironic, she owns a piece of property that not only has been forested down to nothing, if you look on her aerial map to bare ground almost, there's hardly any timber left on her property, as well as rental properties and other houses. So I think it's ironic, and it's kind of calling the kettle black when you say, no, you can't do something yet. I have all these houses and all these other properties that have been developed within my own place. But I think it's unfair that at one point you give and at the other hand you take away. That was my comment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hutchison.
And I hope that the picture was as impressive to you people as it was looking at it.
Yes, we have, ma'am. We have seen pictures like that.
Yeah, that's very, very frightening.
Yeah. Stephen, could you offer a point of clarification? About how many counties have adopted this template?
State law provides for all counties to have adopted it. Ours is more restrictive than state law requires. I am not entirely sure how many other counties have a forest template test that is more restrictive than state law.
Okay, so most counties are already abiding by this, I would assume. Regarding the power lines arcing, I'm in contact with Portland General Electric, PGE, quite a bit. And they now have a very strict policy. Man, that power is put off immediately. And that happened, was it last summer, I believe? Throughout certain areas of Clackamas County where high winds came up, it was low humidity, it was very tinder dry in August, and they turned off the power so the power lines would not arc, as maybe what happened in this situation. I don't know if that's what really happened. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know really what happened on that. So when I say we're a little bit more prepared, we are. And then PGE had a lot of criticism because they turned off people's power and they couldn't get it on for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days because they were in remote areas. So, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And that's the way sometimes our society works. Thank you very much for coming forward. Up next, Marvin Johnson. And you live on Olson Road. Interesting. Please state your name, your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
I'm Marvin Johnson, and I'm at 21000 South Olson Road in Beaver Creek, next door to Ann's property.
Okay.
So a lot of what I have here is kind of repetitive now, but I'll try to get through it fast. So my wife and I purchased a property 9 years ago that we're at. It's 40 acres. And we'd always talked about protecting an old-growth forest. That's what we wanted to do here as well, is just protect the land. And It had been logged before, but they didn't take any of the large cedar trees. All the old growth cedar trees were there, all the old growth hemlock were there, and they left several hundred of the large fir trees. So they did a good job, and they left the entire riparian area reasonably. All of that, they didn't touch at all. So it's a beautiful spot still. So in there, it was completely full of native trees and plants, and it's home to much wildlife. And there we'd seen deer and beaver, pileated woodpeckers and bobcats, and much more. And we built a 2-mile foot trail with bridges over the whole property. And that's all it was. We didn't want anybody even driving on it with, ATVs or anything. And our unnamed creek that ran through our property also ran through the property directly next to us, which is what Ann and Jay have. And we heard from the owners of that property hadn't been there in at least 10 years. And we had heard that they were interested in selling. And they told us about a potential buyer that had plans to log the property and, make the money to build their house and an area for horses. So I checked with Clackamas County at that time to see if the creek's riparian area was protected as part of the Molalla River watershed. And they said that this creek was not, and the logging could happen up to and in the creek here. So we wanted to protect that piece of property too, but actually we couldn't afford it by ourselves. But I made an appointment with Clackamas County to verify the land was still available to build, which Ann touched on earlier. And the clerk there pulled out a template, which I had no idea what it was, and looked at all the records and checked out that and said that nothing had changed prior to the last decision. That's all she could say. She didn't say that it was still buildable, because I would have to do an actual building permit for that. So brother and sister-in-law, Jason and Ann Delfell, they have similar interest to us in preserving forests. And in October of 2016, they decided to buy. So we took out some money out of our retirement to give them 50% so they could buy this. And the total purchase price was $340,000.
Please wrap it up. Get to your main point,
Much higher
sir.
than, okay. I'll skip on down a long ways. There are a couple ways to fix this. We urge you to change the Clackamas County Forest template to align with the rest of the counties in Oregon, or make a small change that allows properties up to 85 acres. One of the properties is only 82 acres that wasn't allowed. And, if this property remains unbuildable, then it's an extreme and unfair financial hardship for them. And there are no winners. There would just be losers, however, including a family that has invested their entire life savings into a property that was buildable upon purchase, and the loss of 20 acres of native trees and a riparian habitat, which would certainly be logged.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. If you don't think that you had ample opportunity to voice your testimony here, you can always submit it email, and it will become part of the public record. Up next in the room, Andrew Stamp. Please come forward, state your area of residence, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, honorable members of the commission. My name is Andrew Stamp. I'm a land use attorney in Lake Oswego. I live in Happy Valley. I'm not here representing anyone in particular today, but I have a kind of academic interest in these issues, so I wanted to express my support for what I believe are a good set of legislative amendments. In particular, the 3 that I've focused on in reviewing the amendments are the nonconforming uses, the template dwelling, and the lot of record dwellings. And I'm jumping for joy to know that the county staff has proposed to modify the definition of lot of record, because I have always thought that the county's definition was a real travesty. To address that issue first, the county's historically viewed lots that were substandard in size at the time of zoning to be consolidated with any other adjacent lot that was in the same ownership. And that was sort of done automatically as a matter of law. There's no record of that anywhere in the in the land records. You talk to a realtor, they wouldn't know about it. You would talk to a title company, they wouldn't know and frankly wouldn't care because it's not covered by title insurance. The only way that you would know that is either if you're a real wonk and go through the code in excruciating detail, which I would say 99.99% of the people in the county don't do, other than people like me, or if you were smart enough to ask staff. And hopefully that day you got someone on staff that had been around here long enough to know the answer. If you didn't, you might still not get the right answer. So it's a stealth assault on property rights, and it's a real travesty. I'm so glad to see that you're finally getting rid of that abomination of a law. It leads to a lot of unintended consequences too. It's a very complicated area of law, and by bringing this in consistency with state law, it also allows the county to take advantage of the ever-increasing body of case law from LUBA that interprets what all the other counties are doing with their laws. And so it's a win-win all the way around. With regards to non-conforming uses, 1 year is simply not enough to commence rebuilding of a structure. So I'm really glad to see the county going to 2 years. You need to look no further than the fact that in 2021, the Oregon legislature passed a law that gave wildfire victims of the September 2020 wildfire, I think they gave them until 2025 to commence reestablishment. And that's sort of a recognition that once you have a fire, you got insurance issues you got to deal with. You've got to hire someone to rebuild your house, and trying to get on the schedule for that can take a long time. You've got to get your building permits. It's not easy to do. Those laws were originally enacted in 1970s, and I think it was a simpler time, let's put it that way, And now with increasing regulations, increasingly needing to rely on professionals to do all these sorts of planning actions and building actions, it's great to see that extension to 2 years. Template dwellings, I'll be real quick, I'll finish up. 2 points. One, I don't think the revisions to the template dwelling ordinance will have a huge impact. I'd be surprised if there's more than a 10 or, I'm guessing here, but 10 or 5 to 10, maybe 15% increase in the number of properties that would qualify for a template that currently don't. I don't expect that to be a huge, but it's a lifesaver for people that, like the folks that testified a minute ago, who really it seems unfair that they would not be able to build based on being short 40 feet. And secondly, the question was submitted about other counties and what they do. I've submitted template applications, and I was kind of go through in my mind, maybe 5 or 6 different counties. Clackamas County is the only one I've seen where they differed from state law. All the other counties I've worked in was always the standard 11 lots and 3 dwellings. So it's really nice to see Clackamas County deciding that, hey, state law regulates this sufficiently. And so with that, I'll close unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stamp, for coming forward. We do have some folks online who would wish to testify. However, if there's anybody left in the room who wants to testify, please come forward, put a blue card in the basket, and we will call on you. Tony, do we have anybody up online?
Madam Chair, I will begin with Wendy Kellington. Ms. Kellington, please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi there, my name is Wendy Kellington. I am also a land use lawyer, and I urge you to adopt the amendments as well. I also urge you to tell your staff to come back with 3 additional amendments. The first being to extend or to make clear to your staff that your zoning code provision 1310 at your packet electronic 581 regarding time extensions applies to extend the time of a conditional use permit. If you file a timely application to extend your conditional use permit, your conditional use permit doesn't instantly become void while staff's getting around to approving your extension, because it takes a long time to implement a conditional use permit. I have a client who got an approval in 2019, filed a permit application for a site review in 2020, and still doesn't have a decision on that. But in his effort to tick through the various county boxes to implement or meet his conditions of approval, he got certain permits, certain approvals. The minute he looked at and thought he was going to, expire, he had us file a timely extension request, but the thing expired before we finished up on all the CUP, and staff enthusiastically the same day revoked all of the permits that we had gotten in our efforts to tick all the boxes, threatening that if staff didn't decide to approve the extension, we'd have the pleasure of starting over. And I don't think that's what your code says, but to the extent that your staff is reading it that way, I don't think that's what you want. And I would really urge you to please tell your staff to come back with an amendment that makes clear that when someone files a timely time extension for a conditional use permit, that extends the time of the conditional use permit and doesn't give staff the right to revoke all the permits someone has gotten while they're ticking the boxes. The second thing I would urge you to ask your staff to come back with is a modest amendment to the non-conforming use provisions beginning at your electronic 527 1206.06 regarding to destruction, to make clear that you don't have to get all permits that you do not have to get all permits in order to commence, that really all you need to do is to apply for the permits. Because again, you're some poor guy, your property's been destroyed by a natural disaster, you're trying your very best to get your permits from the county, all the ones that you need, but as I just described, it can take forever. As Commissioner Smith explained, she's heard from citizens, it can take forever to get permits. And so if you have to wait to implement, to get approved permits, chances are you're going to have kind of a rough time getting to yes. And so I would urge you to say commencement, and you can do this, you can define your term commencement to mean filing for the necessary permits. Filing the application should be good enough. And the last thing is that I would urge you to ask your staff to come back with a code amendment that makes clear with regard to the discontinuation provision of 1206.08 sub 2 at your electronic 530, that if someone files an appeal of your, non-conforming use verification or whatever, so that you cannot commence, you can't, build whatever you need to do with regard to your alteration or start the non-conforming use again without exposing yourselves to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even $1 million in improvements for a non-conforming use only to discover that you end up with a loop or remand or something like that. There should be a provision that says that during the period of any appeals that someone files, local or LUBA or Court of Appeals or even writ or review, I guess, that the discontinuation period is told. And that's all I have. I don't want to exceed my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy Stamp. We're going to continue with the testimony, and we'll give staff a moment to gather their thoughts if they choose to answer some of these points that she brought up, okay? Tony, who's next?
I will continue with Dave Honeycutt. Mr. Honeycutt, please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Smith, Commissioners. Dave Honeycutt. I run the Oregon Property Owners Association. I also serve on the Governor's Wildfire Programs Advisory Council, although I'm certainly not here on behalf of that council. Our task at the council, we were created by Senate Bill 762 in the 2021 session, and our task on the council is to advise state agencies as they implement the state's wildfire program, which was radically changed with the passage of Senate Bill 762 in the 2021 session. I can tell you that one of the things that we talked about, that the legislature talked about extensively as part of 762 was land use, and they certainly had the right and the ability to make changes to the template dwelling standards to make them more restrictive and to, for example, to mirror what Clackamas County has right now. and they chose not to do that. Our council, when we made our recommendations and wrote our report to the legislature in 2023, earlier this year, certainly could have recommended that the legislature adopt new legislation to change the template dwelling standards and make them more restrictive, and we did not do that as a council. And so there's been opportunities to address that. This is a 30-year statute. It's been around 3 decades, and the legislature has never bothered to change it to match Clackamas County's requirements or to make them even more restrictive. One thing we did, one thing that Senate Bill 762 and the legislature did on wildfire is they tasked the Oregon State and ODF, the Department of Forestry, with mapping high-risk wildfire areas, and the state is in the process of doing that now. And if property is located, it'll apply. The maps will apply statewide. If a property is located in a high wildfire risk area, then there are home hardening requirements that will be imposed by the state fire marshal, or actually, excuse me, by the Building Codes Division. And there will also be defensible space requirements imposed by the state fire marshal to address potential wildfire risks. So these issues are being addressed statewide. They're addressed by the legislature. They're addressed by the state agencies. And I can point out to you, and I submitted written testimony. I hope you get a chance to read that. I pointed out to you, and I've looked, and I actually provided you with the citations at the template dwelling standards for your neighboring counties, Washington, Marion, Yamhill, and Multnomah. None of them have either a ban on counting 80-acre parcels within the template or a requirement that you have more homes within the template than what state law requires. So we're really asking you just to go back to state standards, look to your neighboring counties, do what your neighboring counties are doing. And I think those commissioners in those neighboring counties value resource land the same way that you do. So I would take a cue from them and the state and the legislature and the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council, and go back and mirror state law. That would be tremendously helpful. Love the ordinance, appreciate all your time and work on this, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for testifying. Tony, who's next?
Next up is Michael Dawkins. Please state your name and area of residence. You will have 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Michael Dawkins. I live in Ridgefield, Washington, and I'm talking to you this morning about a vacant lot that I own. Parcel number is 00168375, which is essentially at the corner of Southeast Park and Oakfield in Milwaukee. So I wanted to discuss with you today to consider inclusion of the cottage cluster zoning code from House Bill 2001 that went into effect in July of 22 into the MR1 code status. Essentially, this lot is an MR1 and I can build a duplex. The way that it works out to like 1.6 rating, meaning 1.6 units, which allows you to build a duplex. Across the street with the new cottage cluster code, you could build as many tiny homes as you could fit on a lot. So my ask is, since this parcel is 130 feet to the bus stop on Oakfield and 520 feet to max, then this is a perfect candidate for transitional housing for low-income folks. I retired from the Portland Fire Marshal's office in February, and the need is there. I would also like to mention consideration for micro apartments to be able to put 6 or 9 400-square-foot studios. Parking requirements are almost nil because this population, per social agencies that I'm working with, don't have requirements for parking, although you would have a few. I appreciate your consideration. I realize it's been a challenge to enact House Bill 2001 as it was thrust upon all the counties, but it definitely is a disadvantage now for an MR1 zoning, and quite frankly, this lot is sitting vacant, and it's just cost prohibitive to build a duplex on it. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Regarding the last person's testimony, the testimony you're taking today has to do with what was presented. That's what the public hearing is about. Matters of subject matter that we presented today. Do you want to address that in about a very short amount of time, Martha?
Yeah, sure. So you are correct. That's not part of this particular packet. I don't think that type of amendment would really fall under a minor amendment. It is certainly something that's on our radar screen, the MR1 and MR2 zone and the disconnect with middle housing. We have a lot of items that will be coming to you as potential things to include on our long-range planning work program, and it would be really more appropriate for inclusion in a future project.
So Michael Dawkins needs to, just because this is a land use hearing, it's not a land use hearing on everything in Clackamas County, it's very specific. Tony, do we have anybody else who wishes to testify on what was presented here today?
Madam Chair, Gerald Murphy would like to testify. Please state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Gerald Murphy, or Murph. I'm Chair of the Clackamas County Planning Commission for public testimony. Chair Smith, Commissioners, I have counted 9 people so far that have come forward to speak about the template dwelling test change. 4 of them are landowners. We're making this change for a total of 9 people. I think this is a pretty radical change when there's a considerable amount of people that don't want to see this changed. I've been involved with this from the very beginning of the workshop that we had last year. I'm open, I'm listening, but I see change only for a few people. I want to bring that forward. Also want to bring forward, we hadn't talked about the public safety power shutoff. You did bring it up, but when that happens up here, we lose freezers. We also see generators coming out. So now we have small engines starting all over the place, being gassed while they're running. This is creating another fire issue. So I'm trying to protect my community. I'm extremely involved. I'm bringing something to you that's an obvious hazard. Please reconsider this and do not put more people in the forest. Forest was designed, our zoning was designed to grow trees, not homes. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, is there anyone else?
Madam Chair, that concludes my list.
We have no one else in the room who would like to testify. I will now close the hearing for public testimony, and Commissioners, I will entertain your comments and questions. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
I'd like to thank everybody who came here today to enlighten us on this issue. Ms. Fritzie, for your very interesting and complete briefing. We've seen testimony in support of these changes and testimony in requesting that these changes be denied. But I think the one issue on the forest template test standard, we've heard enough today to make me want to support the staff recommendation on ZDO 283 because I think that this change is respectful of property rights. It reduces government regulation and puts us in compliance with the state standard for the forest template test standard. It brings into the realm of possibility a home and a dream come true for some people. I have tremendous respect for somebody I consider to be a friend. That's Gerald Murphy, or Murph up on the mountain. He just talked to you. He's concerned that this change of the forest template standard might only affect 90 people, but I believe it will affect many more people, because this is not the first time that somebody like Ann and Jason Delphine have had this problem. And so for the people from the Bull Run, also friends of mine up there, who are concerned about this, I think if you listen to this testimony today, you will see that if we change the forest template standard to the state standard, you're not going to see a large impact, a large change in the number of people living up in the Bull Run. So with that, finally, I'd like to say that I support, once again, the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner West?
Ann and Jason Delfield, I'm sorry that this happened to your family. 40 feet, and I didn't hear about it, I didn't know. I bet you a lot of people up here didn't know. I'm sorry that you had to have this expense and hardship. And I think Clackamas County owes you an apology. And so I want to apologize to you and say I'm sorry. Thank you for your testimony today. This is kind of a little cooler than I thought it was going to be when staff briefed me, a little more impactful and personal, and thank you for making that story real. I think a lot of times we get into government and local government because we want to see good government. We want to see it work well for people like you, people like your neighbors. And I think today we're going to get to do that. We're going to right some wrongs and do good government. We're going to rip away some regulations that were unjust and unfair. We're going to say no to alarmism that unfairly demonizes rural people who are just trying to take care of the land. And so this is an important local decision. Sometimes people don't show up for land use decisions, or they don't show up for some of this more wonky government local stuff, but it impacts people's lives directly. I've said for a long time that the government that impacts your life the most is the government closest to you. I think this is that example. I wish there was a better process that if we changed how we looked at the template with a plexiglass square, then we went to more precise GIS, navigation, satellite imagery that excluded you all of a sudden based on a process change by government, the big bureaucracy that's sometimes almost always difficult to navigate. Just go to the DMV and see how that works. The bureaucracy got in the way here, and we didn't have a process to make this right over 40 feet. So the government impacts your life the most is the one closest to you, and I hope we can right the wrong today. I will be voting in support of ZDO 283, and I feel very strongly that we're doing the right thing today.
Thank you. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I will be voting yes today, even though, again, I have concerns about wildfire, because I think it makes, from a policy perspective and a pragmatic land use perspective, it makes sense for us to align with the state on these issues. Again, I feel like I'm a little concerned because I don't think the fire situation is going to get better. I think appears that it's going to get worse, but if people are aware of that, so be it. I just want to make one comment that insurers are very wary of issuing policies to people who reside in conflagration-prone areas. And again, you'll have to get those policies, and often if they are approved, they will charge you higher premiums than they do for regular property insurance policies, and demand that policyholders acquire protective devices, the mitigation piece, or at least live in a property within the proximity of a fire department or another structure with safety and security mechanisms. So again, this is a risk issue from a land use perspective. I think we should be in alignment with the state. I just hope that it sounds as if everyone out there is aware of the risks that they're taking when they live in a forest where fire is becoming more and more of an issue. But I will support this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I appreciate all the hard work our staff did. I want to just say that there's a lot of things here that didn't get a lot of attention, but are really, really important. I see, so I just want to highlight the fact that we're fixing some problems and making life easier for a number of areas around the county. Before I came to Clackamas County, I was from Lane County. I had friends that lived in Lynn County, and a grass fire broke out over there and burned a few homes down there. And Lane County and Lynn County in that particular portion are relatively flat. So when the wind blows, a grass fire moves pretty flat. So I know that the big emphasis is all on trees, but I'll just tell you, it's not limited to trees. You can lose your property if you do not harden your structures and put fire breaks in. Last summer, I visited a friend out in South County who had done just that. His home, his structures were all hardened, and he had a substantial amount of fire break, and he had a lot of trees on his property too. And the fires that broke in September of 2020 came up onto his property and burned a lot of his trees, but his home was essentially a fire break. And most of his property was surrounded, had burned, but the properties on the opposite side of the fire where it broke saved a number of structures and a number of other properties and actually stopped it from spreading. So if we do things right, frankly, I think that a property well-built, well thought of with fire breaks and have that defensible space can actually save lives, save structures if they're done correctly. But I did want to say that a lot of talk here today about fires. They can happen anywhere. They can happen in urban areas. We're all vulnerable. We just need to be really careful with what we do. So to the topic here, as Mr. Madcore answered my question, anyone who does not like what we do here today can appeal it. I agree with a lot of my colleagues' comments as far as the alignment. But at the same time, I do understand the challenge, not the challenge, or maybe the concern about density, or it's really not going to happen here as we think of density. But having more homes or more structures, I am sensitive to that to a degree, but I'm also mindful of people's property rights as well. I do hear a lot of people that have their cabin or have their vacation property, or they bought their property in that area with the hopes of building, a cabin or a resort, or not a resort, but a place to reside, maybe long-term after they retire. So I will support this as well today, and again, I appreciate everyone's comments, and we'll look forward to next year's package of amendments, as we always are constantly streamlining our code.
Yes, thank you for that. You bet. There's always work to be done, as was brought to us by an attorney online. We'll address that issue later. Thank you very much. I just want to, before I entertain a motion that's listed on the top of page 3, I just want to acknowledge the testimony we received from the folks in Bull Run area who are against the template. I really feel for what's happening to the situation of folks that live up there. They have 2 other issues that are really weighing heavy on them. And in addition to this, one is the bridge, and one is the possibility of Portland Water Bureau building a water filtration plant and condemning some farmland in Clackamas County. So I suspect maybe that is weighing heavy on them as well. We're here to try to help on any of these issues, but I do acknowledge that people have differences of opinions. We here at the Board of County Commissioners weigh all that carefully before we take a vote. And yes, I have read, yes, I have studied this issue deeply since I was a legislator in the Oregon legislature in 2001. It's when I started my journey along land use. And a culmination of some of those issues are here today. Yes, it takes a very long time in Oregon, unfortunately. No other state in the United States of America has adopted the land use system that we have, in that every single square inch of land is zoned for something in Oregon, and it makes it very cumbersome, it makes it very expensive, and it really does remove a lot of the private property rights that we should be enjoying. And that's really my overarching philosophy as I deal with these issues like this. With that in mind, I will entertain a motion on the top of page 3.
Chair, I move that we approve ZDO 283 as recommended by staff.
Seconded.
Commissioner West has moved we approve ZDO-283 as recommended by staff. Commissioner Scholl has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Commissioners. Now that the proposal has been approved, I will direct staff to draft an ordinance reflecting this decision and include it on the agenda for this board's adoption at a future meeting. We will entertain a motion. Do we have a date, Tony? Are we moving on, Stephen, to the motion, top of page 4?
I believe that staff would like some time. We will discuss and propose a date to bring forth that ordinance for adoption.
I'm just going by the script.
Oh,
We'll be ready shortly. I'm thinking sometime in August, right?
early August.
Yeah, early August.
Do we need to entertain this motion at the top of page 4?
No, I think we're good. That's if you weren't going to move forward with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Just point of
Yep,
clarification.
we're fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, everybody who bothered to come testify. Our staff for a lot of very hard work on this. Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.